Okay. Invincible Season 3 has wrapped up, which I may be a little late to because I have been sick, but trust me, I was there. These past 2 weeks have certainly generated the most hype for this series in a long time. It's hard to have not heard of Invincible by now, and yet some would say that the show hasn't been any good since its first season. Invincible Season 1 came onto the scene with a bang, starting with a relatively typical plotline before ending its first episode with a jaw-dropping fight scene that would leave its audience's perspective on superhero shows changed forever. Then that was followed up with an unbelievably emotional and violent conclusion with a shocking performance from the one and only J.K. Simmons. However, with Season 2 having Omni-Man be in the backseat, there was much more filler, and generally the season was agreed to be pretty lackluster, having some high points, but exposing the major flaws of the show at the same time. Plus, there was that dreadful mid-season break. So, was Season 3 a return to form, or another disappointment? Well, I can tell you one thing. There were times throughout its release that I believed one, and times where I believed the other. But to settle where I really stand, we'll have to get into spoiler territory. I have to say, one character who has always been a great part of the show is the titular Invincible. Even during Season 2, Mark was getting some solid characterization, and here, we see him undergo a complete transformation by going through a gauntlet of hellfire. Mark begins by being betrayed by one of his closest allies, Cecil, before being slammed with 4 enemies that challenged his perspective. First, an alternate version of the Immortal who begged to be killed. Then there was Powerplex, Aaron Paul's character, who forces Mark to look right into the eyes of the destruction he's caused. And finally, the 1-2 punch of Angstrom Levy's Invincible Army and goddamn Negan as Conquest. Throughout this season, Mark is constantly challenged by villains who have no sympathy for him, as well as drastically depleting moral compasses, and he tries each and every time to keep his hands off them. However, with the return of Angstrom, it makes sense that Mark would begin to reconsider killing as an option, considering that his failure to do so in the Season 2 finale resulted in that big-headed fella laying waste to his planet yet again. It doesn't help that Oliver, his new little brother, seems completely okay with murdering the baddies. I'm honestly a fan of Oliver this season. While he's certainly an annoying little kid a lot of the time, having him nearly go full-blown villain in Episode 3 was genuinely unexpected, and yet makes sense when you consider the violence he saw at such a young age. That final moment in which Mark decides that he will kill the next person to come for his loved ones feels very earned. He has tried, for so long, to keep his conscience clear, but it's obvious that holding back is still resulting in death, and he can no longer tell Oliver that eliminating a threat like Angstrom or Conquest for good is wrong. I'll also say that Steven Yeun is probably this season's MVP, considering that he was able to channel several different voices for Episode 7 and dig deep into his emotional bag in the finale, but we'll get more into that later. When it comes to subplots, things are pretty hit or miss. The biggest drop-off in quality probably goes to Debbie, who is simply irrelevant for most of the season. Sandra Oh's talent is kind of wasted, since she only has a few important moments early on before she's relegated to telling Oliver to be safe once every episode, and that's about it. She does meet a rebound love interest in this season too, but he's pretty much the most normal guy I've ever seen in my life, so there's not a lot to talk about there. I'd also say that Amber is wasted here, and I've seen notes saying that this will be her final season before she departs for good. If that's the case, that's pretty ridiculous. Amber shows up about 3 times in this whole season and doesn't get any sort of climactic send-off, so it feels more like they're just sort of awkwardly fading out a character into the background that they don't know what to do with until everybody kind of forgets she was there. I'm not particularly going to miss Amber, since she really only was ever interesting in Season 2 a little bit, but it is disappointing that the writers seemed unable to work with her at all. I honestly would have preferred if that shot of her at college seeing Mark fly over her in Season 2 was the last time we saw her, since that would have felt more conclusive and less like an afterthought. On the topic of good subplots, we've definitely got a couple. Rexplode continued to shine in this season after his promotion to essentially the show's tritagonist in Season 2. This time we see him and Shrinking Ray cope with the trauma of their insane Lizard League fight, especially Ray, who has a lot more time in the spotlight this season. The two's relationship is very heartwarming, with moments like Rex's crude drawing of them having dinner feeling especially sweet, and plus, Ray's decision to step away from superhero life is completely believable considering her backstory. She never really got the autonomy to decide whether she wanted to be a superhero or not, and after nearly dying multiple times, I would expect her to want to be done with everything. But, of course, nothing can end well, so Rex goes and explodes. Real bummer. I already commented on this in my episode 7 review, but I will say, it was pretty obvious that this was going to happen. It's a fantastic moment to conclude Rex's series-long arc, but I have to say, as a conclusion to these two as a relationship, it's simply not enough. I feel very strongly that we should see more of Rey's reaction to Rex's death, since the scenes she is in afterwards are very minor, and it's possible that she could be completely cut from the 4th season. I personally would say that as long as they give Rey a couple moments in Season 4 to open up about her Season 3 experiences, that would be enough for me to approve of this arc as one of the best subplots there has been. But simply removing her, like many would be a great mistake. Checking in on Nolan, it's unfortunate to say that he is still pretty much a background character. After Nolan's profession of sadness in the final episode of Season 2, I figured we'd see him return to the forefront and break out of Viltrum prison with Alan. While that does happen, it takes until episode 4, and after that, we don't see him at all. I was generally satisfied with the aforementioned breakout, but all the build-up scenes to that escape were very meandering, and the fact that Nolan is still barely relevant bothers me, because J.K. Simmons was clearly what elevated Season 1 to be the best the show has ever been. I think it's simply a problem with Omni-Man's insane amount of star power. If Nolan were to return to Earth, there would be no time for anybody else, so they have to just keep him locked up while the story progresses. I understand it, but it's certainly disappointing. I would guess that we will see Nolan and Alan rip the Viltrum Empire apart in Season 4, as they would be able to do that without involving Mark. Maybe Nolan and Cecil will reunite while both fighting Viltrumites, who knows? I'd like that. But alright, let's get to the real meat of this review. The finale episode of the season. The penultimate episode with the Invincible War was massive, but I did discuss it already, so I'll just link you to that review instead of repeating myself. The finale, though, oh boy. Invincible has developed a reputation for violent, all-out brawls opening their finale episodes, and this is probably the most brutal yet. Not to mention, as a fight, it is likely the best of the show, at least if you remove story from the equation and simply focus on the coolness factor. Conquest is a massive threat, being more powerful than Nolan, Anissa, and of course Mark, and additionally choosing not to represent Viltrum. Conquest is not there to take over Earth. He simply enjoys the sport of killing. And so he begins to tear Mark apart before forcing him to helplessly watch as he maims both Oliver and Eve. By the way, Eve, who I've failed to mention at all so far, is unbelievable in this fight. Robert Kirkman gets especially creative with her powers, letting her go to town on Conquest for a while before he inevitably rips her to shreds, resulting in one of the most emotional and disturbing scenes of the series. Eve, after this fight, looks seriously fucked up. She looks almost zombie-like, and for a minute, it seems like she actually dies. Then, she suddenly enters Super Saiyan mode and roasts Conquest, allowing Mark to get the upper hand and furiously headbutt his skull open. It is unapologetically disgusting. I would love to see Eve harness her power in Season 4 now completely untethered, and possibly enter a training phase in which she levels up to Viltrumite level. However, for now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Not only does this fight have a lot of impact story-wise and acting-wise, for the first time, the animation is good. I'm not saying every scene of this show has been animated like shit forever, but it's always been a point of contention in the audience. Throughout Season 3, I felt like there was a small upgrade, but I was seriously getting bothered by how rough the show looked considering its popularity. Well, it seems like they were just saving up, because this episode looks unbelievable. The impact frames add so much weight to each punch, and when someone comes in swinging, they come in with force. The brutality and chaos of this fight is doubled by how smooth and creative the animation gets at times, showing Mark at his most ruthless and angry. As some have said, this episode's main fight is 27 minutes of pure, unfiltered rage. No holds barred. And I fucking love it. Overall, this season definitely had moments reminiscent of Season 2's filler episodes, and I would say it retreaded its ground a bit. I mean, even that incredible fight is starting to develop a pattern for finales that is simply predictable by now, and I hope that Season 4 ends differently. However, it also reaches some of the highest points the show has ever reached. Invincible Season 3 has fucking balls for some of the stuff they pull, and they have me craving more. For Season 4, I'd personally like to see that Nolan and Cecil reunion I talked about, Mark and Oliver hunting Angstrom, and possibly Ray becoming Eve's training partner because I can't think of any other way for her to be in the show. I mean, they were both close with Rex, and it keeps Ray in a point that is between superhero and normal life. It does make sense in my mind. Oh, and Debbie should do something. What should she do? I don't know. That's Kirkman's job. I'm going to give Invincible Season 3 an 8 out of 10, a very solid score. There were ups and downs, but ultimately, I can't say I wasn't pleased with the outcome. Anyways, it's Severance time. And after that, Andor. God damn, this year is moving fast. Bye now.